So good evening, everybody, and thanks, Rosalie, for coming along this evening. I'm going to be hosting the majority of this, and but I'm delighted that Robert Leslie from THAW is going to be making coming in on some key parts, because this is very much about a joint effort about trying to look at one of the latest things we've been considering in Orkney, and that is not just about the whole process of renewables, but the just transition and really what it means for Orkney. Just really point out that this is sort of the latest in a series of events that we've run. We had the Common Home Plan back in May when Robert McAlpine presented on some different ways of looking at the energy picture. Leslie Riddick in September did a piece on the ultra-local focus of power, and the Just Transition Commission themselves also did a joint workshop with us back in December 2020. And more recently we did a thing with Warmworks back in February. So the point is, the Orkney Renewable Energy Forum, which is mainly hosting it, has been looking at things other than purely just the energy side of things. As a local membership organisation, it's always been driven about energy efficiency and the preferential use of renewables rather than just renewables automatically. And of course, everybody's welcome along to the monthly talks. And we're now 22 years old, which seems quite remarkable. Robert, do you want to talk a little bit about THAW?
Yeah, well, about THAW probably, and just some of the regional and national fuel poverty issues as we see it aligned to the just transition and the target on net zero. But I always think it's maybe worth looking back a bit before we're too far ahead. And you know, while THAW was established there in 2014 and got already up and running in 2015, late 2015, I think it was, we got our first funding. The reasons for being were obviously the increase in fuel poverty situation in Orkney and a perceived lack of action there then. But yeah, electricity, when it was becoming nationalised in the 40s, when I'm going to look back, it was a meeting in Kirkwall on the 9th of May 1946 where Tom Johnston, who was the former Secretary of State for Scotland at that time, and he was by then the chairman of the North of Scotland Hydroelectric Board, he was describing how electricity was going to change lives in the Highlands and Islands, talking about the rural distribution scheme that would make electricity available to 6,500 inhabitants in rural areas, Orkney, you know, and emphasising the benefits that electricity would make to farming, you know, milking and threshing and many other ways of working would be transformed. And he said at that time, we're providing amenities for hundreds of thousands of householders. That would be across the Highlands and Islands. We cannot in the present enjoy any amenities. And he was talking about real amenities, by which he meant absence of toil, relief and labour. That is what we will provide. He said we will provide opportunity for the construction industries, small industries, perhaps large industries. Those of us who are living this 5 years hence, given a fair field for the hydroelectric, to see a complete revolution in the outlook and possibilities of life and prosperity in our Highland counties. He obviously meant the Highlands and Islands, including Orkney by that. Obviously he had to fight Westminster politicians at that time, when he was still Secretary of State, who were wanting the hydroelectric power for Scotland's glens to be prioritised as a cheap energy source into industry in the south. Instead, told them that their first loyalty was to the people of the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, and that was enshrined in the Act in 1943, ensuring that ordinary consumers would have priority, and then the anticipated large power users and any surplus energy would be sold to the national grid, and profits for these sales would then help reduce distribution costs to more remote areas, and insist in carrying out what he called measures for the economic development and social improvement of the North of Scotland district. So that was the social clause that really showed that the Hydro Board was envisaged as much as an instrument of rehabilitation in the Highlands and Islands, and not just an organisation to provide electricity. So having taken that look back, today we've got a situation where in our privatised market, electricity consumers in Orkney and other areas that can't access mains gas are paying a premium for electricity, despite the Highlands and Islands being this massive contributor of clean green electricity to help Scotland and the rest of the UK meet their net zero targets. When campaigners, including the housing association that I was working for at the time, and the early THAW trustees came together in 2015 to highlight that electricity tariff difference between North and South Scotland, and for that matter the rest of the UK, where at that time there was a 2p a unit surcharge in the North for a single rate tariff. We were looking for equity and a just transition in resolving that situation, but that didn't work because fuel poverty campaigners in the Central Belt at that time, they wouldn't put up would be a small increase in prices in the south to allow the delivery of a lower price in the north. So the smaller population in the north of Scotland lost out that time. Now we've got this situation where folk that are able to heat their homes with gas are paying around 4 pence a kilowatt hour for heat, yet households across Orkney and the rest of the Highlands and Islands, including a significant number of social housing tenants, are paying 18.4 pence per kilowatt hour, and that's for the SSE's total heating total control tariff for their heat. The heating cost, or the heating unit cost for total heating total control, has gone up by 161% in the past 10 years, 21% in the past 2 years. So we did a bit of a calculation in THAW when we picked up on these figures that come out in October, new prices, and somebody heated a home to the same level as they did in 2011 for £740 at that time. With this coming winter, have to find £1,780. So, and by an example of one of these collapsed energy companies, I was contacted by a customer short ago that was seeing their Symbio deal of 12.36 pence per kilowatt hour being replaced by the Eon, the supplier of last resort there, the unit cost being 29.3 pence. So 136% increase in unit cost is no small amount, and that person will be able to buy 57% less electricity if they're budgeting, this coming winter. So we were looking for solutions, obviously, to this, and one of these that's been mooted more and more at a national level that we've been banging on about for years would be the removal of the environmental and social policy costs for electricity to put them on mains gas or in federal taxation. That equates to 23% of your electricity bill at the moment, so it would obviously significantly reduce fuel poverty levels in Orkney and elsewhere that can't access mains gas just now. And I understand that there are discussions ongoing around this between Consumer and Ofgem and HM Treasury, that changes, we're being told, might be up to 18 months away, so another 2 winters. I did suggest back in April the post of THAW manager comes with a seat on a body called the Energy Consumers Commission, And I joined that at the back end of last year. And we had a meeting with a civil servant in what they call the affordability unit of the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And when they were talking about having a call for evidence on fairness or costs sometime later this year, it's not come out yet, I don't think, but we'll be waiting for it. I suggested that didn't need to wait around for evidence, that they could maybe use Orkney as a pilot area to remove these charges on household bills as a way of acknowledging the energy injustice that we're living through at the moment. We're going to be holding the breath on that one. Basically, the situation that we're in at the moment would see the electricity and energy emergency awards that THAW made last winter replicated this winter, and that was, we made 778 emergency energy awards worth over £57,000 to households in Orkney, and that was up for just over £6,000 of electricity vouchers distributed in 2019-20, so an increase of 850% in the emergency energy support to households in 1 year. So looking to some of these solutions, we really need higher levels of funding for energy efficiency at a national level and locally to ensure that moves to low carbon electric heating don't push folk further into fuel poverty, because we've seen obviously the very swift removal of support for boilers and so on, and a transition there very quickly to heat pumps and electric storage heaters. So it's going to be a real challenge to make that start up when you're working with a national fuel poverty programme and switching fuels, because we're already seeing in the central belt of Scotland that local authorities are holding back for switching that switch for gas to heat pumps because of the price difference, whereas we really don't have a choice. Spoken in the past in this group about the condition of housing in Orkney, and I think really now's the time that Orkney Islands Council would do well to release some of its rainy day oil fund to set up a cash required for houses ahead of energy efficiency work. A lot of houses are in the wind and watertight, and there's no point in dipping into money for a national electricity scheme or anything that the council might add in to enhance that at a local level. If the house isn't fit to take these measures, and if our councillors were waiting for a rainy day, I would suggest it's absolutely chucking it there now. Thankfully, Scottish Government ministers attending the recent Sutherland Fuel Poverty Summit in early October. That was Kate and Marie Todd. Both said they felt that the Scottish fuel poverty target of no more than 5% of Scottish households in fuel poverty by 2040 and no more than 1% of households being in extreme fuel poverty wasn't enough. And Marie Todd did point out that has to be achieved in every local authority area, though, not just across Scotland as an average, so that is an important safety net. There was also a call during that meeting for investment in trusted local organisations to deliver services to households in areas like Orkney and Sutherland and so on. And that's really welcome, because organisations like THAW fit that bill. And it was really welcome that in talking about a new energy agency, Kate Forbes recognised the need for boots on the ground, and it was important that she felt it was important that the energy agency would meet people where they are at. So I'm going to hold her to that, as these plans emerge, because I think we've found over the years that, whereas sometimes the national programmes try to do a single visit sort of scenario to help folk with their energy efficiency, so found multiple visits and lots of other more holistic sort of services were needed to get folk through that process. So I think that there's going to be a lot more intensive work done with ourselves across, in terms of getting through that. And the Orkney fuel poverty strategy finally is ripe for update on it runs to 2022, and it's currently under housing in the council, but I think we need to ensure that it sits higher up than that and treats fuel poverty as the health and wellbeing issue that it clearly is, rather than only housing. And just finally, I think that we need to recognise, in the current situation that we're at with the energy market, that fuel poverty targets come ahead on net zero, and they're really only going to be, we're really only going to address that net zero target and have a proper just transition if we tackle fuel poverty alongside that, and don't prioritise the net zero drive and leave Orkney households behind in that. So I'll leave it there. There's plenty of other things to do, and apologies for not having any slides, but having had the words of our former pipe major at Kirkby City Pipe Band ringing in my ears when I was walking the dog earlier this afternoon, having just flown back to Aberdeen, his phrase was always, fail to prepare and prepare to fail. So I felt that I was better not together a pile of slides, and having seen some of our technical difficulties, I think I'm even gladder. Yeah.
Thanks, Robert. So we've gone slightly different direction to the way we were talking about doing the slides earlier, but we've ended up doing Thaw's bit first, but I'll drift into the other bits and pieces now as well, if that's okay, Robert. I think we've heard some really useful points there about the importance of making sure that the just transition is more than just a technical solution. There's a huge amount of social interaction, and we need to remember why we're doing all this lot. So I'm going to step back a little bit and just talk about what is the just transition, because the Scottish Government in their Just Transition Commission set out a statement, which I'm going to dismantle in a second, which basically says the Scottish Government is transition for both the outcome and also the process. And these two things I think are very important. It's not just one, it's both. It's also about trying to build a fairer and greener future for all. And the whole process must be undertaken in partnership with those affected. And it's all about making sure that we both tackle net zero and in a climate resilient economy that delivers fairness and tackles inequality and justice. So the point is, it's a huge area, and we're certainly not going to solve this one tonight on a oneer. So what we thought we'd do is try and see if there are some pieces we can pick at to try and illustrate some aspects of this. I'm going to look at a couple of points in here particularly that are relevant, particularly from an OREF point of view. One is about greener, and the other one is about the definition of those affected. So in terms of greener, what is it that a just transition is supposed to mean? And that I think in the greener sense is quite clear and is quite high level. And principally, it's about having habitat protected. It's about restoration of loss and much lower impact of what we do as a whole. And I have to say, fundamentally, I think this comes down to procurement. This is about making sure that we buy the right stuff and only enough of the right stuff, which has been designed to have a low enough impact for it to be able to be handled by the ecosystem services that we've got. And we need to make sure that we're also pushing to restore loss, because frankly, this is not just about stopping things getting worse, it's trying to claw our way back against some of the damage we have done. And it's about fundamentally making sure that habitat, define your animal to suit or plant to suit, is the habitat of whatever is here on the planet is protected in some way or other. I think the greener element of this has got a very clear and high ambition, and I think we can, I'd be surprised if people on the call that don't really subscribe to that as a whole. In terms of those affected, I think that's as well, that needs dismantling and considering in some depth as well, because frankly, who isn't affected by climate change? I don't think anybody's getting out of this alive, so we need to make sure that we recognise that it does affect everybody. But also we need to think who's within the scope of our efforts. Is it Orkney or is it Scotland, the UK? You know, how wide do you cast your boundary? Because I think you are absolutely clear you've got to set your boundaries for attention. If you just sort of vaguely flail around doing something that's sort of good, you will fail to achieve much effort. So we need to make sure that we focus properly, but also when we set our boundaries, we don't prejudice the others, i.e. those outside. And also the question is, how much effort are we actually going to apply? Because we don't have an infinite amount of effort ourselves. We don't have an infinite resources. We have to be very focused in what we're actually doing. And I think going back to the old Agenda 21 slogan of acting locally, thinking globally, is really, really important, because where are you going to apply your effort? Are you going to apply most of your effort locally in a decreasing amounts in wider areas, or are you going to spread the same amount of effort across everybody equally? And I would argue that probably from Orkney's point of view, we principally need to focus our attention on our own areas, but don't prejudice others while we're at it. So I think we do have to recognise that we do need to try and deal with things that are close to home, rather than necessarily always thinking about the full global side. We have to trust others to be looking at some of those global aspects, or more accurately, they're part of the globe. So from an OREF point of view, I think we recognise that our focus was principally got to be on Orkney, but don't forget the rest, and also make sure that we're making the most of the opportunities for Orkney as a whole. And those opportunities come in a variety of ways, because it's about visits and engagement, it's about talking to the people who come here and trying to explain what we're doing, and the bottom point is learning from them when they do come. But it's also about building partnerships, because we can't do this on our own. And we need to recognise that if we can do work locally, that can create contractable services, which themselves can then bring revenue to the county and actually bring wealth in. And we need to be looking for opportunities of replication. So where are the other places that can benefit from our experience? And indeed, what can we replicate from others already? So OREF, as a renewable energy forum, has been very focused on renewables, and I think this is partly our major contribution that we can make to the challenge. And I want to really just look quickly at the energy picture, because we do know how Orkney uses its energy and what use energy it has. And some people will have seen the following diagram, which we used in the COP community events that were on earlier in the week. So an energy audit was undertaken by Aquaterra in 2019, and it showed how we use our energy. And the right-hand column of that, as you can see there, are the fuels that we actually use, going from LPG, kerosene, coal, electricity, road diesel, etc., etc. And we know how we use those different things, because we use them in a variety of different ways, from different types of buildings at the top in the purpley colour. The blue bits are principally about terrestrial transport. The orangey bits are about flights, and the sort of mid-blue ones are about ferries, and then a little bit about crude oil processing. And the point is that we've done really well so far, but we do understand that they break into two principal areas: heat and light, and also transport. And the work we've succeeded in doing so far, or as a whole, has actually been about basically greening up those bits. So we've greened up the electricity, we've greened up a little bit of the petrol and diesel, but frankly, at the moment, we've only done about 20% of the job. So there's a huge amount still to do. And the question is, where's the energy picture going to go in the future? And if we look out to 2030, this is a proposal of what is likely to be happening. So by 2030, we are going to simplify this diagram down and show where things are going to go. Principally, everything, pretty much everything, is going to have been electricity at some point. Now, the electricity you'll be using in a variety of ways. It either directly captures electricity to point of use, which is principally for a lot of the land transportation side of things we expect, but there'll also be electricity used in heat and heat pumps in a variety of ways. We're also going to use electricity for electrolysis, and that electrolysis is likely to then lead to the production of synthetic hydrocarbons for things like flights, inter-island and off-island flights, if they're not electrified. It'll be one of those two. And we'll also see the electrolysis then used for the production of other materials, most likely going to be ammonia, which will probably have its role within synthetic fuels for ferries and heavy shipping. And then there'll be other stuff which will in agriculture, marine transport, which will be a mix of the above. And the point is that we are going to see this change that's going to be going on in the way our energy mix works. Now, how do we know this is going to be going on? Well, we know that change is coming. We know that we're going to see the electrification of vehicles. That was a photograph taken when the Scottish Transport Secretary came up, and we had a very quiet flash mob of turning up with electric vehicles. And pretty much every vehicle in that shot, with the exception of the tanker and the chip van, are electric. So we know that we're going to see an end of fossil fuel vehicles in the coming years, and we've seen Orkney make good strides towards trying to adopt electric vehicles, but there is a lot more coming of that, and there indeed will be a change that's going to be happening with our ferry fleet. So we know that we're going to stop burning diesel, and we know that we're going to be using alternative fuels. What will they be fueled by? Well, either electricity or ammonia or hydrogen or something, but we know it's not going to be diesel. We also know that there is a huge amount going to be happening with offshore wind leasing in the immediate area, and there will be announcements made just after Christmas as to who has got each of those leasing rounds. And together, they and a couple of other ones that don't quite fit onto that chart will lead to about 8 to 10 gigawatts. The UK is using about 50 gigawatts of electricity at the moment. So 8 to 10 gigawatts of offshore wind in the waters around Orkney as a whole. And we're also going to see the change to flotta, which was announced recently, with that becoming a hydrogen production facility using probably offshore wind. And then finally, the other major change that we hope to see, which goes back to a point that Robert made earlier, which is about better housing, because frankly, some of our housing stock is pretty shocking. And the fact that we're putting people into houses which they can't afford to heat, I think is a crime. So just picking up one of those items, which is one that's close to my heart, something I'll be talking about on Radio Orkney tomorrow evening. So if anybody can face any more of this, then feel free to tune in. Which is about electric vehicles. The strapline at the bottom is how do we make sure this is all fair? But anyway, electric vehicles. So electric vehicles can be seen on the roads at the moment, and people are saying, oh, well, that's where it's going to go. But we need to recognise that they are not something that is easily available to everybody, and we have to make sure that access to these vehicles is actually fair and is a way in which doesn't leave people behind, as Robert said. Because the point is they are more expensive to buy, and frankly, there are a few bangers out there to actually just scrape the last few miles out of, which you can run really cheaply as you can with petrol cars at the moment. But the point is, the electric vehicles, if you get ahead of the game, if we do actually get them there, they are actually much cheaper to run. They're about 5 pence a mile, as opposed to about 15 pence a mile for diesel. So they actually, if one has got a poverty issue, then doing your transport cheaper than you do it at the moment is in the right direction, dealing with the poverty. But the problem at the moment is, because they are expensive to buy, this is actually advantaging those who have got the capital and the income. And the point is, we may therefore need to come up with alternative use models. And there are some around at the moment, such as shared ownership. And the photograph on the right-hand side are 2 of the EVs on ED, which are owned by the ED Development Trust. The ED Partnership, which are really there to provide social use of vehicles. And we've also got car clubs starting, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And indeed, we'll also see alternative models coming on with things like autonomy, i.e. automatic vehicles turning up and being able to take people from A to B without necessarily them being owned, and therefore not having sunk the capital into the cost of the vehicle. And I expect that's going to be pretty disruptive overall. So in terms of the car clubs, I just want to talk about something that's going on right now at the moment, and that is with the Co-Wheels Car Club. There are 3 EVs that run by OHAL, one in Hope, one at Doonby, and one at Somerville Square. And also there are 4 EVs that have been provided through the Reflex project, one at Kirkwall Harbour, which is the photograph of the one on there, and also 3 over at Stromness campus, partly intended to be used as pool cars for the campus, but also intended to be used for people generally who need access to a car but don't necessarily want to buy one themselves, or even can't afford to buy one themselves. Now, the point is, with the Co-Wheels Car Club, the reason this is important is it does help inclusion, because it's free to join, and it's only and you get £25 free mileage when you're at it. Anybody who's over 18, and it has no upper age limit, which I think is important, because it then means that we don't disenfranchise people as they get elderly and not able to come up with the insurance cost. And the cost is only £5.50 an hour. Now, what does that mean? Well, it effectively means that Stromness to Kirkwall and back you can do for £20. Now, at the moment, it's £6.50 a head on the bus return. So if you've got 4 people need to move around in the car, it's actually cheaper on a Co-Wheels car than it would be on the bus, and you've got the advantage of it being door to door, etc., etc. And the point is, the car club process type of way of going on is both inclusive and, I would argue, affordable. So there are things that are going on at the moment, but we need to dramatically increase this stuff, and we need to really find ways to expand it dramatically, so that when people are thinking about buying their second car, they don't, and when people are needing to use a car, there is always one that's available to them. Somebody pointed out to me a while ago in a statistic, which was, if you don't have a car, what is the most likely form of transport you will use? And the answer is a car, because you'll either borrow one, get a lift, or take a taxi, are the majority of the ways that people without cars get around. I understand. Please correct me if I'm wrong on that one. So that was looking at a couple of examples of things that are going on. And the point really is that we need to make sure that no Orcadians are actually left behind when we go through this transition. We know we're going to decarbonise our society. We need to make sure that it's affordable, and it's something that takes people along on the journey. And the point is, it does all really seem to fit together, because we know that we're going to have a prevalence of renewables. We know we're going to be electrifying transport. We know we're going to need to have better insulation. And we know we need sustainable employment. We're going to see the electrification of heat, and we're going to be able to build on the fairly high levels of energy literacy at the moment, but expand that to make sure it's carbon and energy literacy. And we're also going to see improvements with the flexibility in the grid, which we've been struggling with for a number of years at the moment. And we do need to make sure we're able to seize the opportunities, because with those and better connectivity, it then gives us the opportunities to really build a society which is that fairer and more just way of operating. And the point is, there will be other things that are going to come along. Now, the bit I really wanted to do now to sort of kind of throw the meeting open is, what are we missing? So I'm going to stop at that point, and thank you for your attention so far. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'll be really interested in anybody's thoughts or anything that we've said or you think we've missed in this evening. Thank you.
Hi, it's David. I'm trying to raise my hand, but I'm not sure it's working. So, point I would like to make is, almost everything you said about transportation was about cars, and I'm realistic that cars are going to be a very large part of that. But I would like us to be thinking a bit more about electric bikes, for instance, and how you can encourage bicycle use more than cars, and also the public transportation methods that we're using. Hello. I'm not hearing anybody else.
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry. Did you hear any of that?
No.
Oh. So I've happily been talking to myself for the last 10 minutes or so. That's rather annoying. Okay, fair enough.
No, we heard your presentation, but not if you responded to the previous comment about the electric bikes.
Fine. Okay. Oh, that's a relief. Oh, good. Okay. My visions. I've been sitting here talking to myself with the kitchen complete. Right. Can somebody give me the question again, and we'll take it from there. Sorry about that.
So this was for me from David, and I was just saying, what you said about transportation was very car centric, and I'm realistic that cars are going to be a very large part of it. But I think we should be talking a little bit more about bicycles, including e-bikes, and also about public transportation. So it's really just to make that point that shouldn't all be cars.
Absolutely right. No, I completely get you there, David. The point I just sought to draw out one particular thread, which is something that's close to my heart. But yeah, I entirely get the point that there are other ways of going on, because frankly, we're going to see the electrification of all forms of transport. We're not saying people have to stop using any given form of transport. It's just that we can see that that one has got public attraction at the moment, or it's got public traction at the moment. No pun intended. But yeah, there are opportunity. Well, there are also e-bikes are being delivered. I think there's some. Evelyn was saying some have just been delivered. I can't remember where it was now. It might be Edie actually. They've put some on at the moment. So yeah, I think there are other angles there as well. Laura?
Yeah, I also want to pick up and pull together both Robert's presentation and yours, because I felt they were really interesting and kind of, it would be good to put them together a bit closer. And for me, it ties together with this issue around the difference between equity and equality. Because as you said at the beginning, Neil, there's this important question of who's the we that we want to talk about. And you said we want to focus on Orkney, do we want to focus on, you know, a wider region, whatever. And I thought that was a really crucial thing. But I also wanted to sort of remind us that the connection for me between what you talked about, Neil, and what Robert talked about with THAW is the fact there's this question of we in Orkney is not necessarily everyone in Orkney, but this understanding that there are important differences across the islands, as we're very aware of. And equality is about, you know, providing equal access to resources for everyone. But equity is about this question of, well, actually, where are we right now? And who has what and who doesn't has what right now? And it seems to me that's a really important question, because it says, well, who are we going to, do we want to sort of nuance that question? It's not everybody in Orkney. Maybe some people or some parts of Orkney want to focus on recognising existing inequalities. So for me, that's it's often a difficult question, but that's one of the things I think THAW does really well, because it's an organisation which is explicitly about addressing a particular group of people, addressing that particular inequality. But I think it's also a wider question potentially for OREF and members, because that's saying, well, where does OREF want to focus its attention? Which bits of Orkney? And for me, you know, when thinking about equity and equality, it's also across both the social dimensions, but also over the kind of, you know, technical dimensions. So we know, for example, I mean, you're talking about big issues with transport, but, you know, ferries don't feel, right? So they don't, you know, ferries don't feel anything. You can deal with the really crucial, and it's not saying it's not an important issue. Of course it is, you know, and you've done so much work about this in OREF and yourself, Neil, about the, you know, dealing with the problem of carbon in the ferries. But it's almost like there's some strategic choices about what are we going to look at. And so that's what I wanted to sort of emphasize about, you know, recognizing where efforts might be, and also recognizing who can do what. So again, OREF, you know, a question of, well, who can do what in OREF, and different organizations do different bits of the puzzle. And that feels, again, recognizing differences and how they can be leveraged. And finally, for me, the other thing I would say that in terms of carbon literacy and energy literacy is, you know, teasing those out slightly differently, is remembering that when we have, reduction in carbon, we get a number, and a number in a spreadsheet. What does it mean, right? And it's again the emphasis. Well, we want to reduce carbon because it affects species in the environment, and we care about them. It affects people. You know, some people in particular places, and we care about them. So for me, it's just that reminder when we're focusing on, what do we want to focus on, and getting numbers down sometimes can belie actually the thing that we care about, and to remain focused on what it is that we're trying to care about, and use the numbers to do that work, but don't get kind of, seduced by worrying about the numbers, when actually what we really care about are, people over here and species over here and the sea over here. And, so just that kind of reminder. And I think for me, that's an important part of this question of a just energy transition is, just for whom and what can we do where? So that's me trying to put what you talked about, Neil, together with Robert's presentation. So I thought it was really important.
Thanks, Laura. I think you made a far better job of it than I have there, so that's good. I'm glad we got that down. I completely agree. But any other thoughts on that particular point?
I think Robert, you wanted to come in.
Do you want to come in on that? Then I'm going to take a couple of questions on the side as well. So, Robert, go.
It was just to say, around that's the sort of human side of it. That echoed what Marie Todd said at the end of the Sutherland Fuel Poverty Summit, where she said that she'd been interested in hearing, she enjoyed seeing all the data and so on, but she said that behind these statistics would be human beings, facing a really challenging winter ahead. We definitely need to remember that when we're talking about the targets and things like that, because in that whole area around what the choices are when you're rationing electricity. One of the I thought when we had the one that's always trotted out, that heating and eating choice is bad enough, but I heard the other day about a chap that relies on oxygen to keep him going, obviously because of a health condition, and he'd been turning this heating either right off or down significantly so that he could afford to run the pump to give him oxygen, and that's in the face of the rising costs at the moment. So when you're getting down to that is almost a life and death choice. To me, mind, that really should be focusing minds in Orkney about how just things are out there.
Fair point. John, you've made a couple of points in the chat about how you see that the government has been failing Orkney, and how OIC are sort of the closest point in the governance structure. Did you want to say anything particularly there, or?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, hearing you.
Yeah, that's the closest governance structure we've got, and actually I've tried to deal with Scottish government and UK government various ways, writing to them and what have you, and you always seem to hit a brick wall. So I think it's through OIC they've got to try and channel something for everybody that's in Orkney. Because from a personal point of view, working in the co-op, working the pay point machine, when people are coming in every week paying 50 quid plus for energy, there's something seriously wrong. And that's only going to go up this winter, because our electricity bill's going up 50% this coming month. But for a lot of people, especially when you're on key cards, you're talking a hell of a lot more. So something's going to give for people, isn't it? And it's just not on.
No, I think you're right, and I think the point you made at the end of your comment there, your feelings this will be a big issue for the 2022 election, because obviously that's going to be in May, so we'll have been through a winter by the time that comes by, and I'm sure you're right, this is going to be something which is going to be front and centre.
Yeah.
Could I just pick up on a point you made about OIC's roles and stuff? And I think it's quite interesting. OREF had been taking issue with some of the procurement choices that the council have made of late, with its lack of a policy to have zero carbon in its purchases. And the council uses a process called MEET, which stands for the most economically advantageous tenderer process for selection of goods and services. And one of the items within the meet criteria is that now fair trade can actually be used as an award criteria for deciding on goods and services if the council chooses to use it. So there are tools which are available, which simply weren't available some time ago, which I think might be could actually be really useful in this sort of space. Lauren, do you want to come?
Yeah, I just it's a Sunday, so I'm kind of brainstorming slightly, but this idea about something economically advantageous. There are many different approaches to economic theory. Do they basically, is that mean just the cheapest, or actually, thinking about exactly? So I'm just thinking about different kinds of economics. I'm finally getting around to reading, Kate Raworth's book on donut economics. And it seems to me that we've got a number of ways about what is economically advantageous. And just hearing about fair trade, that's one, but it seems we've got the SDGs from the UN, for example. There could be a whole load of ways that could be, reinterpreted. I just wanted to open that up.
So just going to say that where I was going to with this is that I think the council has the opportunity to use other measures other than just cost, but it will need to want to do so. For example, it talks about such the criteria include the qualitative, environmental and or social aspects linked with the subject matter of the contract. These are all permitted now for the council to actually use in determining where it spends our money. Michael, do you want to come in? And I'm going to answer a question that Janet had posed. Michael, go.
I probably can't speak for the council, but I think they are interested, at least, in broadening out the indicators that they're using. But I think maybe the issue is more resources and skills required to do that. So it may not actually be that they don't want to do it. It might just be that it's not practically feasible right now. And maybe that's something we should look into, how we can support them to be able to do those kind of things. I was also going to pick up on something else, not completely separately, but on the comment about expensive electricity. There's not much we can do about that directly other than giving out handouts, but we can help people to retrofit their houses so that they can avoid using as much energy and reduce down their usage. And I think that is something that is going to be key to where we go next in terms of reducing fuel poverty and making a just transition as well to, say, the heating systems. We need to focus on the fabric first, repairs, insulation, and how we do that. If we don't do that first, then people are going to be putting electric heating into basically being blown back out of their houses again, depending on the situation of the house. Other than that, I was going to also pick up on the who's affected. Just the wording of the Just Transition Commission. I think maybe they were sort of suggesting more to do with the people who are affected by the transition themselves, so those who are already in poverty and maybe struggling, or those who are going to lose their jobs, or those that are going to need to shift jobs. So for that, you've got sector-specific issues of people, say, in the oil and gas industry, even if they are paid better than most of us already. But you've also got the wider aspect of everybody, because everyone's affected. And yes, the point that Laura was making about equity and ensuring that that people who cannot afford to pay their costs are given a way to access some of the new services that are coming in. So, for instance, just to pick up on the co-wheels example, someone might not even be able to afford what you think is quite a cheap cost to take that car somewhere. If we can find a way to reduce down those costs even more for the people that can't afford it by slightly increasing costs at the upper end, then there might be a way of helping people to gain that equity, or there may be other ways of doing that. So it's just to open it out into discussion.
That's Michael. Okay. Janet had posed a question about plans on charge points, saying that there are none on Flotter and some houses can't get cars to the house to charge. Yeah, recognise that that's going to be something that needs working through at the moment. Interestingly, according to the draft consultation by the Scottish Government on the building regulations, it showed that 84% of Orkney's houses do have off-road parking where charging could be undertaken. That's their estimate at the moment. That seems quite high to me, but nonetheless, that seems to be the figures that are being quoted. So I think the general tendency, the way this is going, is that most people will charge their cars at night at home, and those who can't charge at night at home will then use public charging. And so it's important that we've then got the right balance of infrastructure, because there's no point putting in hundreds of public chargers and then people actually then just use the ones at home, because home charging should always be cheaper than public charging. So it'll be interesting to see where that actually goes. There are changes afoot in the means by which charge points are being supported. That's going to start in March, which is going to make money available to people who've got a bed and breakfast and those sorts of accommodation providers who don't yet have a car, because before you had to have a car in order to be able to justify getting a charge point. And that's being changed so that the charges will be available for people who've got B&Bs or get assistance towards it. So that will change the way in which charge points could be available. You don't have to have the car to have the charge point, you get the charge point, which could actually be useful. And just picking up the point that Susan's just made there, says the research seems to indicate that public charging isn't needed as widely thought. Completely agree with that, Susan. The work we've done locally has shown that as well. When charging for charging, i.e. paying for getting electricity out of a charge point, was introduced, the number of cars in Orkney with electric vehicles didn't drop, or the rise in cars didn't change, but the amount of charging being done on some charge points dropped 75% overnight. The point was that people suddenly thought, oh, sod it, I can't get one over on the council anymore, I'll have to go and charge it at home then, and then did charge at home. So I think you're quite right, we need to make sure that we've got charging in the places that really need it. Susan, you want to come in there?
Yeah, sure. I'd just like to continue that discussion a little bit, if the echo isn't too bad. The legacy. So if we go back, say, to 1911, and we start looking at what happened in rural areas, urban areas, institutions, organizations, as the cars started to come in, because 1911 really only a few rich people had cars. And then, the history rolled out as it did. But there were really big questions at the time, especially into the early 20s, about what is the balance of rights between all of the people who use the space in the urban forum and the few people who want to abandon their vehicles in that space. 90% of the time, vehicles are not in use. The utility factor is very low on these things. And so the provision of parking, the space for parking in urban forums, has really been shown to be not productive, right? That space could be used for housing, it could be used for parks, it could be used for retail activities, it could be used for manufacturing. There's so many things you can do with that incredibly valuable space in urban areas. And to have it have to be open, because if it's going to be useful for parking, a substantial amount of it has to be not parked in, so that it's available to park in. And so it really just sort of mushrooms and becomes really a huge burden on everyone to provide this for the people with cars. Now, where we're at right now is very close to where they were in 1920, where maybe 5% of the people max had a vehicle of their own. And, thought, well, what am I going to do with it? Where should I leave it so I can go into the shop? The number of electric vehicles right now, the percentage is very small. And the price of a charged place to park that thing for that one individual with a car is extreme. And so we cannot think about electric cars the same way that we now think about petrol cars. And honestly, we've got to really sit down and have a huge rethink about automobility as a system by which we participate in activities and access our resources, because it's the cost benefit really isn't great for society for that one. There's better ways to do it.
Really interesting points there. Yeah, really interesting points there, Susan. If you only got to go around Kirkwall and see where all the car parks are and how they used to be gardens of other buildings and places have been demolished to make space for car parks. And yeah.
So you've actually seen it happen. Okay.
Well, no. I'm just looking at it and going, blimey, that used to be somewhere that's been built on. So it's there's an interesting point there. Yeah, that's not a theme that I've heard developed before, Susan. That's really interesting. Okay. So, any other points people want to bring out while we're here? If not, Michael, go.
Sorry, my internet is very slow, so I'm not sure if I'm muting very quickly. It was just a very brief point on just to open up the conversation on how we can bring forward inclusivity and participation in this kind of discussion, because I do realise that we're having a public discussion here, but it will be of a set proportion of Orkney that is likely to going to belong to these, and it's going to be very important in the future to see how we can get participation of people who are not likely to be interested in energy or not likely to be interested in most of the stuff that we've just been talking about. Actually, maybe they'll be interested in getting their houses retrofitted or something like that, and it's kind of part of the sort of Just Transition Commission's point as well of who pays and then who benefits. I'd also say who owns as well in the end, because there's going to be a shift of ownership with the transition as well, and we need to keep an eye on where the money's flowing to. That's kind of an additional point.
John's got his hand up. John, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, it's just a brief anecdote really about when I worked in the truck industry. I worked at Volvo for a good few years, and I was in the service section side looking after the customer vehicles. And as the vehicles got more technical on the electric side, a lot of our mechanics struggled because they'd not been trained in it. So they were scared of electrics, so they backed off from it. And for a just transition to a decarbonised system, we need people to be able to retrain easily into the new electric fields. They might be brilliant on engines and gearboxes. When it comes to the nitty-gritty of the electric and the computerised side, especially one mechanics who might be in the 40s plus, a little bit, I'm not liking that. And they might walk away from an industry, and it's not really fair.
Interesting point. Yeah. Sorry, John. I think I spoke over you at the end.
No, we got it. You're right.
Okay, that's good experience. So I don't know we'll get an answer to Michael's question, but I think the only thing I would say is we all need to take ownership of doing something about this, in our own respective spheres and orbits, really. So talking to people about this, making this real and bringing voices into these spaces, I think is critically important all the time, and that's why it's important. It's not seen as exclusive, but should be as inclusive as possible if we can manage. Okay, I'm conscious it's. So
hello, Neil.
Go ahead. Hello, who was that?
Hi, Neil. It's Keith Johnson.
Hey, Keith.
I I wish you'd used Zoom rather than Teams. It never seems to work right. It's just a comment that's not very intellectual, but it's fairly basic, I think. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, hearing you okay. Yeah.
About 15 to 20 years ago, when I was a councillor, fuel poverty came into our conversations. And one of the most difficult things was, how do you get rid of fuel poverty? And if we went back to basics, we said, well, let's make the houses well insulated. And that was the problem. Because if you take an old house and make it well insulated, and to my mind, that has to be done internally rather than externally, it reduced the size of the house, reduced the living areas, size of the rooms, etc. Now, Robert may have more information on this because he's up to date with these, how this thinking goes. But I think that's the basic thing that has to be tackled if you're going to bring about equality of housing to everybody. And until we find a way that we can insulate a house, an existing house, so that people are not put off it because of the lack of space, or I think also with older people, they don't want the hassle that they have to go through to get their house insulated. And these are very simple, basic questions that I haven't had an answer to from anybody. I say Robert may have the answers, and I would certainly welcome them. But I think that's the basic thing that we should be looking at in Orkney.
It's definitely. Just very briefly, it's definitely something that's exercised minds recently, and you know, I've now heard fabric first mentioned so many times, and that you know, over the last maybe 5 years than I have in the last 5 weeks, maybe, and there certainly are thinner, probably insulating materials out there that would be less likely to be reducing the size of rooms, but there's no getting away from internal insulation being intrusive and an upheaval. But me gut feeling was over the past few weeks was that the huge increases that we're seeing in energy costs might just be the stick or the carrot, whichever way you want to look at it, to encourage folk to go down that route. Because you know, if we had you know, good case studies to show you know, the positive impact of internal insulation on, you know, older properties, that might be something that's worth doing. And certainly in the past, I remember being at events where they called these types of events, you know, helicopter events, where you did a host to a really high standard in a location and invited everybody along to see it. And I think these are the types of things we're going to have to do big, and you know, really try and get folk to buy into this, along with the fact that it's going to be hurting their pockets, because there's no getting away from the fact that we've got a couple of winters probably before we see any of these reductions that we would hope for in electricity prices. So yeah, these are the sort of changes that are potentially there, but the materials are expensive. There's no getting away from the fact that you know, we're the size of input for retrofitting is going to be you know, it's fairly high.
So just to answer Keith's point there as well, that there are some systems around for external insulation as well. I know, for example, I think Janice's house was, Renovista was done externally. There's a couple on the Glateness Road that have been done as well. So there are externals on some, but I think the point, to my mind, the key is to not think of housing as monolithic. there are so many different types of housing. I think we need to disaggregate it and work out that we can fix that one and fix that one, and that one has internal and that was external, and that one we can't do anything with, and actually it's pretty shit anyway. Knock it down and start again. You know, so I think we need to look at housing at a quite granular level and work out what is the best solution. But I think we were absolutely key to recognising that we need to get energy consumption in houses down, because if you don't have to pay for the energy in the first place, it makes it a lot more affordable. So I think that's the capitalising of that activity is something that we can do socially, and we really should push on. Susan, you got your hand up and I see you typing frantically as well. Do you want to save your typing, or just
trying to record myself there? I think that's project one, actually, is the not just insulating a house, but looking at the places where people who participate in Orkney as citizens, right? So they're members of the island society, the place where they will be, and that means for hundreds of years. And those places, if you start thinking about it that way, that the whole fabric of living in a place, then you start to see something quite different, and that is that our real estate and our mortgage systems are the problem. If you took each house one at a time and you took the best building science and the appropriate materials and good construction techniques, you know that you could make the houses habitable and much less energy intensive and more weatherproof, right? So that they would last longer. So you know you could. It would have to be a craft. It would have to be a competence. It would have to be a very high skilled position in the community, the people who could actually deliver that. And then it can't just be property that you're developing, it's place. And then the financing is the last piece. And so we had a very nice master's dissertation on that this last semester. So maybe I should look at that, getting that out to people, because I'm trying to talk the fellow who did it, Gordon Dunsmuir, into coming on and doing a PhD, and we'll see if we can't figure out. It's actually an innovation in that space.
Sounds interesting. Well, they'll offer that an OREF talk at some stage, Susan, so we'd definitely be interested if you was an audience. Okay. Anything else you want to do this evening? I mean, as I said at the start, this is not going to be something we're going to solve this evening. It's about making sure it's on the radar and we actually start getting at it. So you've heard thoughts from different people who've got angles and things that we can pick at. So I think between us, if people do want to start picking at these things in their own individual way, that'd be a good idea. David, sorry, I didn't see your hand was up. Go.
Yeah, I was wondering how good information we have as far as the housing stock in Orkney. I mean, is there a big long list? How many houses of what era, with what, how many have been modernised? I can say, I'm in the 70s bungalow with 70s insulation and 70s heating systems at the moment, which it's not. So I think it would be really good, basically, for every domestic house in Orkney, and probably the non-domestic ones as well, is just to have that sort of database of information of where we are.
So I think some of that exists. There are the energy performance certificates which are around, and I know the council has got access to information on energy performance certificates. The other thing is David Flynn at President Heriot Watt, but soon to be Glasgow, has done an awful lot of work through the Reflex project, and they've come up with a load of work on building archetypes. And so looking at a variety of different features there. So I think that data largely exists. Now, not all the EPCs are accurate because some of them are inferred, but the vast majority of them have been collected, and the council does have access to that. And I know Luke Fraser was talking about that in his old role when he was in the council before he went on to Aspire. So I think chunks of that do exist, David, but it would be good to sort of get some more information about that to better understand it, because I personally firmly believe that we do need to work out what we're going to do for each of the different types of houses. And we will have to accept that some houses are never going to be warm and snug. You know, that's just, but that's how it should be. But I also strongly believe that they should not therefore be the houses which are the least desirable, and therefore the houses in which we put people in housing emergency into those rubbish houses. You know, so I think there are issues that start to creep in here about what we can do with housing and who we're willing to force to endure that housing. And I don't think it should be our elderly, our frail, and our disadvantaged. So I turned a bit of a speech, but I'll shut up now.
No, thanks for that, Neil. I mean, I think the point is, I guess we need to take the audit down to a greater level of detail on the domestic energy use, and that would help a lot going forward. Yeah,
I'll do some digging on that, David, and see if we can get that up, because I was surprised how much information there was actually around. So I'll see what we can do on that.
All the EPCs are publicly available, and I visualised them all on a dashboard as well, so I can put more data up if you want from that, and I'll just put it in the chat now. But obviously it's just based on EPCs, so the data's not perfect.
But better than nothing. So you've done some visualisation on that, Michael, are you saying? Okay. And is that, how available is that? Is that your own work that you can put up, or is that what you're saying? Oh, I think you've lost. Can't hear you. I think you're on mute. You're on mute. Okay. All right. Joys of internet. Okay. Fine. Look, I think if we can take this as the start of a conversation rather than the end of one, if somebody wants to do something specific about it, I think you've seen the interest of other people around the room. Well, Michael's just put the link in there about the public the dashboard. So I'm going to draw the meeting to a close because it's coming up on 8:30. So that's enough for an evening, I think. So my thanks to everybody for their participation. My thanks to Robert for clearly setting the scene and the background through Thaw. And let's just say make this a start of a continuing conversation rather than the end of one. So thanks for indeed, everybody, and good evening.